News has just come in that Mason Greenwood, the Manchester United forward, has had all charges against him dropped. I won't get into the sickening things that Mason Greenwood was put on trial for, but we know that he faced attempted accounts of forcing, controlling and coercive behaviour, as well as attacking his girlfriend at the time. So let's first discuss the statement, then look at what this actually means for the future with Mason Greenwood, Manchester United, and if there will be a return. So watch until the end. Let's first go through the statement. Given the significant media coverage of this case, it is only fair that we share the news that the 21-year-old man who had been arrested and charged in connection with an investigation opened in January 2022 no longer faces criminal proceedings in relation to this. The investigation team has remained in regular contact with the legal team, providing any updates of note, and so understand the rationale for the discontinuation of proceedings at this stage, and that this decision has not been taken lightly. Despite the media and public's interest in this case, we have decided not to comment on it in any further detail. I would, however, like to use this opportunity to reiterate GMP's commitment to investigating allegations of violence against women and girls and supporting those affected regardless of their circumstances, throughout what can be a hard and upsetting time for them. An ever-increasing number of officers are receiving specialist training, and the force is more consistently utilising tools available via the criminal justice system to keep people safe and care for the victims. If you feel you are or might be a victim, please don't let this case put you off asking for help. Now, the interesting thing about this statement, I think, is that last sentence. If you feel you are or might be a victim, please don't let this case put you off asking for help. However, we've all watched the videos, seen the photos, and listened to the voice recordings. However, still, Mason Greenwood has been let off. What lesson is this teaching to victims? It is basically saying if your attacker is famous or has money, they have more legal power and your evidence means nothing. How are women meant to come forward when a case like this is dropped despite all the evidence? It is shocking that Greenwood has had his charges dropped. I cannot emphasise how concrete the evidence actually is. You can't really dispute it. It's not specified in the information provided if Mason Greenwood is considered innocent or guilty, but the charges against him have been dropped and he no longer faces criminal proceedings. But this doesn't necessarily mean that he is innocent like people will assume. Most of all, we must remember that this case should not be taken lightly, and that the issue of domestic violence is a serious one that needs to be addressed and tackled. The fact that the charges were dropped does not mean that the situation was not serious and that the evidence against Greenwood was not credible. This case raises questions about the criminal justice system and how it deals with cases of domestic violence. I hope that it will prompt further discussions and changes to make the system more effective in addressing these cases. Now, let me read you another statement from a CPS spokesperson who essentially is a legal representative. We have a duty to keep cases under continuous review. In this case, a combination of the withdrawal of key witnesses and new material that came to light meant there were no longer a realistic prospect of conviction. In these circumstances, we are under a duty to stop this case. We have explained our decision to all parties. We would always encourage any potential victims to come forward and report to the police, and we will prosecute wherever our legal test is met. Now, what we are all thinking is, what is the future for Mason Greenwood? Will he return to Manchester United or even professional football as a whole? Whilst this video was in production, Manchester United did release a statement on Mason Greenwood stating, Manchester United notes the decision of the Crown Prosecution Service that all charges against Mason Greenwood have been dropped. The club will now conduct its own process before determining next steps. United did announce on January the 30th last year that he would not return to training or play any matches, quote, until further notice. Despite this, he remains under contract at Old Trafford until the summer of 2025, and it is understood that he is still receiving his £75,000 a week wage. Following his initial arrest, several of Greenwood's sponsors, including Nike, cancelled their deals with the England international striker. He was also removed from the FIFA franchise and Football Manager series. United stopped selling all merchandise with his name and face on it, and a number of teammates unfollowed him on social media. It may appear that Man United were preparing for a potential return, but I'll talk more about a return later on in the video. The case of Greenwood is not completely closed, as we are aware that any new evidence against Mason that comes to light will be investigated and the case will essentially reopen. I personally don't think he will return, but I would not rule it out. I'm sure Manchester United have been preparing for this day, were probably contacted earlier to say that this is the outcome. As he is still contracted with Manchester United, like I said earlier, it seems like the pair have unfinished business. But of course, Man United would have to be willing to welcome a player with this reputation, and Greenwood would have to feel that he could safely return back to professional football. You need to account the fans, teammates and coaches who would have to welcome Mason as a footballer and sort of forget the past he has. It is very unlikely that Greenwood will instantly return to training, particularly as he has been out of the game for over a year. Even if United were ready to welcome Mason back to Old Trafford, then Mason has to be prepared to have the abuse that will be thrown at him from opposing fans, particularly when he goes to away grounds. As we remember, Kurt Zouma got a lot of stick for his incident, and Greenwood's case is arguably a lot worse. The abuse will correlate. Saying that, a number of fans are calling for Greenwood to come back, and have been calling for his return for quite some time now. If they wanted to, Manchester United could sell or loan out Greenwood, but I think any interest in this will be quite dead, as any club that would sign Greenwood would be met with vast amounts of criticism. At the end of the day though, football is sadly about money, and if Greenwood is the player to take a certain team to the next level, then unfortunately a club may use that opportunity to sign Greenwood for result benefits. But it would be interesting to see how he performs on the pitch if he were to return, as he has proven to be a talented player and many are eager to see how he develops. The case of Mason Greenwood has far-reaching consequences for professional football. Now is the time for a change. It's time for clubs and governing bodies to take a stand against domestic violence and enforce stricter sanctions for players who engage in such behaviour. The victims of domestic violence deserve better. This case has the potential to create a support system that truly helps those in need. It's time for all victims of domestic violence to feel heard and supported, and this case can lead the way. The courage it takes to come forward with allegations of domestic violence should be met with belief and action. In conclusion, the case of Mason Greenwood raises critical questions about the criminal justice system, professional football, and the issue of domestic violence as a whole. It's time for meaningful change. Hopefully, like I mentioned, this case is the catalyst for that change. As I delve deeper into the matter, I'm becoming increasingly convinced that it is important to voice my thoughts on the ongoing case. Initially, I was hesitant to make a video about this news. However, given my prior experience discussing the situation and my opposing views on certain aspects of the case, I felt compelled to share the news and express my own perspective. I ask anyone with questions or unsensitive and appropriate opinions to share them in the comment section below. Thank you for taking the time to watch and consider my thoughts. There are a couple helpful numbers on the screen now if you are a victim of domestic abuse or in need of any help at all.